Good afternoon everyone, my name is Diogo and I'm here today to talk a little about cinema, its story and how important it is. Cinema. I'm sure you've all visited one, but have you ever stopped to think how and when did it all begin? How were movies made without computers and yet, why is cinema important? Many people today think that the end of cinema is near. That is not true. People also said this in 1950 with the popularization of TV. 30 years later, in the 80s, they also said this claiming that VCR would replace it. Again in 2020s, we have people claiming that the same, due to the major streaming platforms such as Netflix, HBO Go, and Amazon Prime Video. It's a fact that in a pandemic period, these platforms were really useful. When that passes, it will be curious to see whether or not people would rather to go to the cinema than watch movies at home. The answer must be a balance. Large studios that produce great and expensive films will continue to use cinema as a way of promoting them. On the other hand, cheaper productions will go to streaming platforms, so cinema will not have an end. And the origin in all of this? Well, it's not very clear where this really started, but imagine yourself as a high-class person who, on December 28 in 1895, during an afternoon, you decided to have a coffee at your favorite coffee shop in Paris. There, you find Lumiere brothers, saying that they invented the cinematograph. Like everyone else, you don't understand, but you decide to watch their presentation. They show for the first time a silent film called L'arrivée d'un train à la ciudad, which means in English, the arrival of a tram in the city, which was a film of a train arriving at a station. The few presents were enchanted and say that they were even frightened by thinking that the train would leave projection and enter the cafeteria. Neither you nor everyone knew that a few years later cinema would become a smash and a universal success. Cinema is based on public projections of animated images, even the word from the Greek kinema, which means movement. It arose from several innovations ranging from the photography domain to the synthesis of movement. Many inventors played key roles in this creation of cinema, in addition to the Lumiere brothers, Edward J. Muybridge, Louis M. Augustin, the Prince, and even Thomas Edison. What were the first films? Well, we have a very famous example, which is Voyage to the Moon, from 1902, being the first science fiction film that used the theme of space travel and aliens. It was inspired by Jules Verne From the Earth to the Moon and A.G. Wells' The First Man on the Moon. The first Western was The Great Train Theft, from the same year, 1902 as well. Do you remember when you were that person in Paris cafeteria in 1895? Now imagine that 30 years have passed and you see a film based on Arthur Conan Doyle's book, The Lost World. You have promised a lot of action in an explored forest. That's what you saw in the cinema. Dinosaurs fighting and people being attacked by them. For the first time, cinema brought creatures extinct years ago with such perfection, if we can call this, in details. Dinosaurs were dolls and puppets made of rubber, and their movement was an illusion formed by several photos with few differences passing in high speed. This technique is called stop motion and was perfect by Ray Harryhausen, who later made movies such as The Sea Monster, Grand Valley, Fury of Titans, and many others. Let's move forward a few more years and reach the 80s, the VCR's era. Polish films, comedies, blockbusters have gained a lot of fame. Films like E.T., The Extraterrestrial, Rambo, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones, Lethal Weapon, and thousands of others. At that time, people started using VCRs to watch movies like they liked or didn't have the chance to see in theaters. It was very remarkable for an entire generation, and of course, who never watched any of those? We arrived in the 90s, when films became more visually elaborated, when computer graphics started to generate animations, as we can see in Jurassic Park and Toy Story, for example. In the decade, pop marries classic on screens. The right word for this is diversity. Tarantino, Spielberg, and Scorsese are some of the most successful directors at that time. Let's try to compare The Lost World of 1925 with Jurassic Park of 1993. We can see many differences, right? The 2000s, our era, the millennium era. Many critics imagined that cinema would decay in this decade again, but that was not what happened. There was modernization, and cinema increased even more. Films like Pirates of Caribbean, Spider-Man, Charlie's Angels, with a lot of action, suspense, and comedy, have innovated in world cinema. Only in 2018, world cinema grossed about $100 billion. To have an idea, it's only slightly less than tycoon Bill Gates' fortune. Yes, he's really rich. Films, budgets, great pioneers, techniques, everything cause of research, studies, and mainly a lot of curiosity for fans of seventh art. In fact, as our friend Maria Luisa Camarot says, cinema involves all the other arts such as literature, sculpture, theater, music, and painting. Is this really important? Yes, without a doubt, cinema is important because it gives us entertainment, opens and propagates our minds, educates society, and of course, it's our representation in the form of a fictional character that is on the screens. I mean, we all have characters that we identify with or we want to be and act the same. For some people, cinema is a refuge or a mentor which promotes their personal growth. For others, an inspiration, a source of culture. In short, we realize that the importance of cinema is really, really impressive. What about the great classics? Well, many claim that the greatest decade of cinema was in 1920s, as it was the beginning of sound in movies, which brought about great changes, besides being a few years later the First World War. From this decade we can mention Charles Chaplin and Buster Keaton, for example. After the Great Depression caused by crisis of capitalism, the industry recovered and the cinema was an initiative for people. Hollywood lives its golden eyes in 1938 and 39. Overproductions such as Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz appeared. We can quote Louis Armstrong and Katharine Hepburn. Throughout the 1940s, the United States was preparing to fight in World War II. Studios invested in musical comedies. Carmen Miranda and Kirk Douglas, his father of Michael Douglas, were some important icons of that time. I recommend The Great Dictator, as it shows the tension experienced in this decade. Rock with Elvis Presley was a hit in the 1950s. Some actresses who scored in movies were Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn, Marlon Brando as Julius Caesar, James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, and Charlton Heston in The Ten Commandments made history. In 1960, cinema is full of great musicals and drama that celebrated the rebellion of American youth. Hitchcock with Pisco and Elizabeth Taylor in Cleopatra, for example, marked films that are still enjoyed nowadays. The emergence of a successful franchise until today was in 1962, started with Sir Sean Connery. Unfortunately, this icon died last month. Do you know what is this franchise?
I think you got the point.
The 1970s were marked by wars, dictatorships, and changes in society, in addition to greater globalization. Movies like First of Fury with Bruce Lee and Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta were very important. I thank you very much for listening and watching my speech in video form. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing it. Thank you so much.